So Earth is flat, right?
Let's not go into that. I'm devoted dietitian George.
And I'm concerned consumer Tam.
And welcome to this episode of the Immunity Podcast.
On this podcast, we research the ins and outs of immune health.
And explore the science so that you can optimize your immune health.
In this episode, we are going to be talking about vitamin D. And vitamin D is very important, and you will find out why it is important. So make sure you listen till the end. And we're going to start with the first question, which is, what is vitamin D?
What is vitamin D? Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, but it is technically also a hormone, which is different from other vitamins. So basically, nearly every cell in our body have a vitamin D receptor. And when vitamin D comes into our body, whether it's through food, sunlight, or supplements, it's not yet activated. And inside our body, it gets activated, hence the hormonal phrasing.
Okay.
Yes. And but the interesting part, which not everybody realizes, is that vitamin D can also be converted into its active form by immune cells.
Wait, so there are two different types of vitamin D forms, active and inactive then, right?
You simplified, yes. You have the inactive and the active form.
Okay, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into that as the podcast progresses. But why is vitamin D important? Let's let the listeners and the viewers understand why it's important.
So, vitamin D is well known for its effect on calcium absorption. So, without vitamin D, our calcium doesn't get absorbed well.
Mm-hmm. So bones, right? Calcium is responsible for bones.
Yes. So it's very important. Like as we get older, if we have any bone density problems or bone demineralization, we are more prone to sustaining any kind of fracture. So, and when we get older, that's not a good thing because it's more dangerous. We're less stable. And yeah. So that's what vitamin D is most known for. But actually, vitamin D is so much more. So vitamin D deficiency or low on vitamin D for longer periods of time, your risk for developing different kinds of diseases increases. And some of those diseases are cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, just to name a few. But short term, what happens is that your immune system doesn't work optimally, and you are more prone, you're more susceptible to contract a virus infection.
I see.
So there are short-term implications and long-term. And short-term, your muscles could also feel weaker, and that's especially when you get older. It makes you more unstable, and your risk of falling increases.
So basically, if somebody experiences muscle weakness in general, unless they're exercising really, really hard, and maybe that is like lactose, in the muscles, right? Is that the same thing as vitamin D problem?
You're talking about when you do a short sprint and you keep going until your muscles feel weak and
burn.
Burn.
So
that's a totally different process. Yeah.
I see. So that's okay.
This is more like you just generally feel weak.
Just overall throughout the body.
Yes, right.
I see. So, that is one symptom of lack of vitamin D. Is there another symptom?
Well, the other. Except for like an impaired immunity and muscle weakness, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of difficult. It's just that long term, it has more of an impact. So we should take care of our vitamin D status and keep it up.
I see.
Keep it up to more optimal levels. Yeah.
Okay, so circling back to your mentioned part about immunity being affected due to lack of vitamin D. Right, so speaking of immunity, isn't it related somehow to the COVID virus, fact, the whole shenanigan with COVID? Is there any relation to vitamin D there?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say, because one of the more recent studies from March of this year actually showed that the people that got infected generally have lower levels of vitamin D in comparison to the people that have not got infected. So besides that, since vitamin D is a very big part in the workings of our immune system, it makes sense, because there are actually different ways vitamin D works on our immune system.
So what are the different ways that vitamin D affects the immune system? How does it influence it?
Right. So one very interesting way is, and I call it it has some kind of Pac-Man skill. You know Pac-Man from the old arcade games?
The yellow ball that swallows everything?
Yes, exactly. So those dots before him, actually you could compare those to viruses, and Pac-Man itself would be an immune cell. So basically, Pac-Man engulfs like the dots completely, which is what an immune cell does with a virus it encounters. So what happens is it engulfs the virus completely, so the virus cannot like go out and about, so to speak, and create problems for us. The Pac-Man skill I'm talking about, we call that phagocytic ability. So our immune cells have a phagocytic or Pac-Man kind of ability.
How many different ways are there that vitamin D influences the immune system?
So there are 5 main ways. I just mentioned Pac-Man. The second one is vitamin D has a great impact on the health of our epithelium. And let me explain that. So your airways, the inside of your nose, in the back of your throat, your lungs, even in your intestines. Okay, so it's covered with epithelial cells, which is basically the inner lining of the airways and the intestines. It's coated with epithelial cells, and together they are the epithelium. So vitamin D actually strengthens the epithelial cells barrier. So it has like a protective function. So if there's something wrong with epithelial cells, if they're not healthy enough, that's an issue, because viruses directly target epithelial cells. They want to hold on to the epithelial cell, and then they can start their process of creating an infection and multiplying, etc., etc. So vitamin D keeps that layer of epithelial cells intact. That's a massive, important function of vitamin D.
All right, so what else can the vitamin D do for the immune system? You mentioned so far 2 ways, right? You said there are altogether 5?
Yes.
What's number 3?
Yeah, so the third one is we have our microbiome, and we've talked about that in previous episode, that the microbiome is actually about more or less 70% of our immune system. So it's an incredibly important part of our immune system, and vitamin D actually sort of directs the microbiome. It's sort of the instruction manual.
So pretty much vitamin D is like the manager of the microbiome. So microbiome are the workers, and vitamin D is the manager, and then our brains are the boss, CEO.
Yeah, sort of comparable. They have a lot of things to carry out, a lot of functions, and without vitamin D, it will get too messy.
Or maybe like a vice manager or something.
Yeah. Well, somebody running the department, yeah.
Sure. All right, so basically, if people have enough vitamin D, then they are happy campers. Is that it?
Yeah, that's actually quite funny, because vitamin D can also upregulate a compound which is involved in immunity, and this compound is called CAMP.
Oh, okay, that's all right. So what does CAMP stand for?
Cathecillin antimicrobial peptide. And that's a mouthful. So let's just call it CAMP.
CAMP is better.
Yeah.
Let's stick with CAMP. What does CAMP do to turn people into happy campers?
So one thing that CAMP does is it increases the antimicrobial activity of immune cells. So Basically, that means they are more active toward viruses and other pathogens.
Okay.
So that's one. But I would like to add one thing to that, is that it has been established that they also have this antimicrobial activity against enveloped viruses. What is an enveloped virus? It's basically the outer part of the virus. And in regard to coronaviruses, I mean, I think most of us are familiar that we have those viruses have those spikes on the outside, right?
For visual representation, there is a picture for any listeners. You can go to our YouTube channel, and on our YouTube channel, you can watch the full episode. And George, continue with the envelope virus, please.
Right. So CAMP has been shown to target envelope viruses pretty efficiently. And the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes a COVID-19 infection, is also an envelope virus. So that's good news. So vitamin E definitely, we definitely want to keep our levels up so it can upregulate this particular compound as well.
So what about the non-enveloped viruses? Are those different in any... Like, I know they're different in a way, of course, but like, are they somehow different regarding vitamin D? Or is there just a completely different topic?
Well, the thing is, like, vitamin D is good for our immune system in different aspects, right? So it's just that this particular compound, which is regulated by vitamin D, is just very effective against envelope viruses. Now, if you have non-envelope viruses, they behave completely different. So this particular compound won't be as effective because it doesn't have that envelope. But it doesn't matter because you still need to have healthy levels of vitamin D for a healthy immune function.
Yes.
So I wouldn't fuss about it too much. It's just an interesting thing to note, especially for coronaviruses and other enveloped viruses.
And speaking of healthy amounts of vitamin D, we are going to get to that part in the podcast, so stay with us. And the last part that you mentioned, the fifth method that vitamin D regulates, controls the immune system, what is it?
Sorry, I forgot to just mention one thing, is where can we find that camp, the happy campers? We can find them, and we just talked about it, in epithelial cells. So, and in lung cells. And lung cells, it's also part of the whole epithelium. So, that is an interesting thing as well.
Hence why smoking is not advised.
Yeah, smoking actually weakens your epithelial cells. So, to be smoking, especially if you're wearing a mask and you take it off and just to smoke and then you put your mask back on, yeah, that it's not really an ideal situation.
It's like sitting in a glass box full of smoke.
Yeah.
But what about we're getting off the topic here a little bit.
So we have one more compound. It also upregulates defensin.
Mm-hmm.
And defensin works very well with CAMP together.
Mm-hmm. Defensin, that sounds... Okay, defensin and CAMP, they sound very much military-like terms, you know? This is a camp on the defensin compound, or whatever they say. So why defensin? Is it... Do you know the origin for defensin, or is that just a different origin names in the future episode we can talk about?
Yeah, if you want me to know, like, a lot of those names, you need to understand it comes from Latin. And I flunked Latin in high school, so I'm not the one to ask. But yeah, they have a Latin origin, and I'm not really sure where it comes from exactly.
Okay, all right.
I'm sure some listeners would be more familiar with that.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool to have a whole episode in Latin? Wow. But our ability is not... Let's not do that, yeah. Okay, so
defensin, it makes sure the virus doesn't replicate as easily. And that's major, because basically the only reason we are getting, like, symptoms is because the virus has had a chance to replicate. You know, the more viruses, and we already know, the viral load, if somebody coughs in your face,
Oh,
is
yum.
infected with a virus, okay, you get a lot more particles inside than when you accidentally touch a doorknob with a few viruses and then you rub in your eye. For example, there's a major difference in viral load. So that person that would get sick from rubbing their eye would not have as many symptoms as getting coughed in the face.
My God, getting coughed in the face, that's the worst, I think. You're like, oh no, don't get me
And
sick.
you feel those little water droplets.
Oh, that's just nasty. All right, so now that we understand a little bit more about how vitamin D works and why it's important for the immune system, we need to look at, I'm guessing, parts where you can get vitamin D naturally or unnaturally. So speaking of unnaturally, let's start with that. Can you get vitamin D through supplements?
Yes, supplements are a great way actually to get vitamin D, and that's because vitamin D has to do with the place where you live on Earth, on what latitude you live. So we'll go into that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So supplements is one way, and I do want to mention the difference between the most common supplements. So generally speaking, when you have a supplement and you check the label, it either says vitamin D2 or it says vitamin D3. Sometimes it doesn't say that. Then it would say ergocalciferol,
Which is
this vitamin D2, or it would say cholecalciferol, which is vitamin D3. And sometimes it would say neither, and it would say lichen. So the common vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, actually comes from sheep's wool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They extract that. It undergoes different kinds of processes, and through solvents, they extract the vitamin D. That's one way. When it says lichen, basically it means it comes from small microbes. Very small microbes, which is, and for any vegan out there, that's the vitamin D you like to have. It's also the vitamin D I prefer because this particular vitamin D3 is extracted through enzymes and alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
No harsh solvents are generally used in this process, so I prefer it for that reason.
And you are a vegan yourself, right?
Yes, I'm a vegan, but so that's not the reason why I advise. I mean, any vitamin D is better than no vitamin D. So if you need it and you can only get vitamin D3 from sheep's wool, it doesn't matter. It will do the job. And vitamin D will also do the job. I think if you are concerned with any byproducts, if you want as pure as possible, then just go for lichen. It doesn't matter what diet preferences you have. It's irrelevant.
All right. So what if someone had vitamin D2 and D3 at the same time?
If you have two different vitamins, it doesn't matter. They both, like vitamin D2. Oh, I do have to add that vitamin D2 is generally less well absorbed. Also, in trials with supplementation, they found that vitamin D3 might also be better in terms of longevity. So vitamin D2 didn't have like you would live shorter, not at all, but vitamin D3 showed there was some difference in longevity, so some benefits there. Regarding to increasing your vitamin D status, vitamin D2 does the job. So
okay, so let's say somebody is listening to this or watching this and they are interested in improving their vitamin D status, right? They would want to buy a good supplement that would be advisable and good for their health. So let's say vitamin D3, right?
Right.
From lichen or
I personally I prefer lichen.
So
just because for the reasons I just mentioned, it's just a little bit cleaner.
Would you advise some sort of vitamin D3 supplement brand for people?
Yeah, there are a few brands that I like. I don't know anybody from those companies, but I just look at the labels. Whenever I search for supplements, basically I have the following method. I look at the label, in this case, I'm looking for lichen. What are the byproducts? What are the ingredients in the supplements? I like as clean as possible.
Okay.
So I go for the cleanest supplements with the least amount, the least amount of other ingredients and fillers, etc.
So let's say, I normally get all my supplements and all my different food supplements from iHerb. And let's say I'm going to hop on iHerb right now and I'm going to search.
Yeah.
And give me a vitamin D supplement I should look up, or give me a name that I can follow and buy for good of my health.
Yeah, so the supplements I advise are based off lichen, like I said, vitamins are extracted from lichen, but the quantity also matters, and I would like to go over that in a minute, why I recommend this particular quantity. So natural factors has one. Those come in capsules. Then there is also a supplement I like. It's a liquid. I mean, some people prefer a liquid. And Country Life has a liquid vitamin D. And they both have 2000 IU, international units. So be sure to watch for that particular amount. Then you have the right one.
And for anyone who doesn't understand why there should be 2000 IU, for example, in a very good vitamin D supplement, we will discuss it in later parts of this episode. So make sure you stick around. George?
Yeah. So that's regarding supplements. Then I just mentioned that vitamin D supplements, I do advise them to people, especially people who live on a higher latitude, and I will go over that as well, but also people who are not getting a lot of sun exposure.
I see.
Yeah.
So how do we get vitamin D naturally? Let's say someone doesn't want to have, they don't trust supplements. Supplements are bad. Where do they get it naturally?
Well, the sunshine is one, like I said. Food is another one. Just food is generally less reliable because we've evolved with sunshine, and sunshine produces our bodies produce vitamin D when the sun touches our skin. Okay, so it's produced in the skin and then it gets converted into the active form through via the liver and the kidneys mostly. So that's one way. But if we eat food with vitamin D, then we need to think of, there are a couple of foods that have more vitamin D, relatively more vitamin D. That is 1, fatty fish, 2, cod liver oil, and 3, mushrooms. Now, if you ask me, they all have their caveats. And that is because there are some negatives and some positives to all of them.
Okay. Going back to sunlight, is it possible to get vitamin D through UV light? If you expose yourself to UV light?
Yeah, so you're talking about sunbeds or...
No, like let's say you install a UV light in your house.
Okay, so there are 2 types of UV, UVA, UVB. Now I mix them up. Sorry, I sometimes confuse which one is A, which one is B. But the sunbeds, for example, you get a tan, but they produce very little vitamin D. And sunlight is the other one, whether it's A or B.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So that's one. I still want to talk about the foods because now you mentioned UV. One caveat of the mushrooms, for example, is that when they are exposed to UV light, they actually produce vitamin D. The thing is, most mushrooms in the supermarkets, they're not exposed to UV light. So you need to specifically look for them. So that's like a downside, I think. The downside of fatty fish is contamination, pollutants, because fatty fish is generally very polluted. So I won't advise to eat fish on a daily basis. I would limit it to like 2 or 3 times a week maximum, and limit yourself to, I generally prefer wild caught if you go for fish, and wild caught salmon, for example, is one of the richer sources of vitamin D. Fatty fish generally has more vitamin D, but salmon is sort of an outlier. That's one. And cod liver oil. Cod liver oil used to be very rich in vitamin D. The problem with that was that it was also very rich in vitamin A, and it was easy to get too much vitamin A. So I don't prefer that at all. And even more modern sources of cod liver oil are even there are lower in vitamin D actually now. So I don't see the benefits of consuming this kind of oil nowadays.
On my supplements, I take supplements, and those supplements have around, I think, 600 IUs of vitamin D3 in them.
Yes, yeah.
So let's talk about the amounts and what is the optimum amount, what is too low, what is too much, which countries, which kind of people, all kind of stuff. Let's go into that.
Right. Okay, so you're saying 600 IU. And so that's actually one of the recommended amounts. If you look all over the world, you look at different guidelines, the average is 600 to 800 IU. Now, if you are exposed to sunlight and if you go outside every day, and I have to add here that we are living on a fairly southern latitude, which is very advantageous for vitamin D production. Not all people live on such a southern latitude.
Right.
So if you live in Northern Europe or the Canada, for example, or the northern part of the United States, it's like you need a little bit more sunlight. We don't need a lot of sunlight here, so you should be fine here because you go out in the sun every day, like for a short time,
and get sunburned.
That's the thing we need to talk about as well. Yeah, but generally speaking, those recommended amounts they are based on minimal sun exposure.
Right. Okay. So, for anyone who knows latitudes, we will tell our latitude, which is 22 degrees. So, guess which country we're in, and so let's go now into
the average recommendations and whether that's sufficient or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah. Those recommendations, they're not enough, in my opinion, and there is evidence to support my claims, and I will share those with you. There are more and more people that actually say that these guidelines, these recommended amounts are insufficient, so I'm not the only one. And the reason why they made that 600 to 800 is because they found that it's good enough for bone density. So remember, like that's one of the functions of vitamin D is to absorb calcium into and so gets deposited in our bones. So, but actually there is that's not really accurate, even just for bone density. And I will go over why just focusing on bone density might not be enough. The fact that for bone density it doesn't work is because studies done on people that unfortunately ended their lives prematurely through like an accident or other unnatural causes, they actually found that vitamin D levels, they checked the vitamin D levels of those people, and then they looked at their bone density. And it turned out that 18 to 39% or so of the people actually had bone demineralization issues, which is actually, if you look at their vitamin D status, it was right according to the recommended amounts, even slightly higher. So what does that tell you? It means actually those amounts cannot be enough for just bone density. And then it's not just about bones, it's about like a variety of diseases. Like our risk for cancer is increased, our cardiovascular disease risk goes up, hypertension. And what about our immune system? So these things we do need to consider, and that's why I would like to go over what may be a more optimal amount of vitamin D.
So in my current supplement, it says 600 IU, right?
Right.
And you said that the recommended supplement is about 2,000. So Why 2000? Why that particular calculation? Can you go into the math a little bit here?
Yeah, so like I said, the study on the people that had bone demineralization issues, the people that died from unnatural causes, so they had vitamin D levels, and there's a measure how we measure vitamin D in the blood. One is we use nanomole, and one is nanograms. It's a little confusing because every country uses their own measurements, so I will just mention them both. The people in the study, they had about 30 nanograms or 50 nanomole, sorry, or 75 nanomoles. Okay, now the recommended amount, if you take 600 to 800 IU of vitamin D, you would end up around 20 nanograms or 50 nanomoles.
And that's too low then.
Yeah, that's lower than the people from the study. So they were on let's call it the higher end. Like if we have 20 to 30 nanograms, they were at 30. 50 to 75 nanomoles, they were at 75. If we look at the people that had higher than 75 nanomoles per liter or 30 nanograms, people did not have those bone issues. So if we look at different studies, like what amount of vitamin D do you need to take to get above those levels? Okay, so we know that. That's about 1,800 IU.
Okay.
Now, but like I said before, to take into account that vitamin D is not just for bone health, it is to protect you against a variety of diseases and to make your immune system work properly. So I cannot tell you the optimal amount, but it makes sense if it's a little higher than that due to the different functions vitamin D has. It's not just bone health. So it's a little bit safer to go above that. And then, but you can also not go too high because vitamin D can also be toxic.
When you say go too high or go too low, let's give people who are listening or watching this a visual sort of understanding what is too low, what is too high. So let's say what is a high amount, and in which country, for example, they have those amounts, and what kind of people, and what stages of life, and what's too low.
Right. So before I tell you like toxic amounts of vitamin D, let me actually first say that. So toxic levels of vitamin D is above 4,000 IU, and that is through supplementation. Now, there's a funny little paradox here, is that when you look at people, contemporary Africans that live ancestral lifestyles, so they're out in the sun a lot compared to, you know, us, we're sitting inside, there's no sunlight here. They have actually, when we convert it, we test those vitamin D levels, it actually translates into like 6,000 IU. 6,000. So that would be very toxic if you would get that through supplementation. But the reason is because the vitamin D that's produced in our skin through sun exposure is actually, our body can regulate it much, much better.
Because it's natural, right?
Exactly.
Right. So
yeah.
so fake vitamin D ain't good then.
I think in some cases it's still necessary, just because we live in less ideal places on this planet.
Okay.
So, but then you'd have to, and that's why I always say, don't go over 4,000. Never supplement more than 4,000 ever. Like some doctors do that in case of like severe health issues where there's a severe osteoporosis or etc. But I'm not going to do any recommendations on that. That's up to your doctor, physician. Yes, but for regular people, stay between 2,000 and 4,000 is the safest, I think. And that is if you are minimally exposed to the sun. Mm-hmm. And in winter, if you live above 50 degrees latitude, for example, your body's not going to make any vitamin D in winter. So why not take a supplement?
What about, given that pregnant women, they are feeding themselves and the baby, do they need a different level of vitamin D in their diet?
Yeah, that's an excellent point you're making now. And that's because if breastfeeding women, if they would have 6,000 IU,
Mm-hmm.
6,000, then actually that would be sufficient to give babies enough vitamin D. And the funny part is, we are giving most of our babies vitamin D drops. You know, that is not how evolution has, set things up for us to give our...
Envisioned.
Yeah, envision it, exactly. So, and that's funny, and that's because moms are generally low on vitamin D. So we need to compensate for that by giving our babies vitamin D drops. Yeah, but that's funny that 6,000 is enough, and that's the same as the contemporary
But
Africans I just told you about.
But for contemporary Africans, I think it's because of skin type and also related to the latitude and the sunlight exposure. Right? It's different, I think.
Right. So now we can actually go into sun exposure because what you're saying is true. It has to do with skin type. It has to do with latitude.
Okay.
So let's start with skin type first.
Okay.
So we have 6 different kinds of skin types. One is the lightest one, and that's more like a ginger-like skin type, which
Like
you
a
go
Brit.
out in the sun and immediately get sunburn.
Like a British person.
Yeah, a lot of British
A
people
white
actually.
British person.
Yeah, a lot of white British people, like white Caucasian people, they have skin type 1. Now, there are also with skin type 2, is still white skin, and personally, I'm a skin type 2. So I go out in the sun, I don't burn that quickly, and when I burn, it turns, I just get a tan afterward.
Right.
So I get a tan. So usually skin type 1 gets sunburn and then gets back to white.
I see. What about my skin type? It kind of brownish.
Yeah,
I'm
so
from Asia, so
yeah, you're at least a skin type 3, maybe like somewhere between 3 and 4, but like let's say you're a 3. That means you need a little bit more sun exposure to get the same amount of vitamin D production. So that's because the darker your skin, the more sun exposure you need. And if we compare a skin type 2, because most of the recommended sun exposure times to get enough vitamin D through sunlight is actually based on type 2 skin. But we know that a type 5, type 6 skin is actually about double that time. So you would have to be, let's say, at least 30-50% more sunlight you would require in comparison to me. And it's not like I don't have a specific math equation for that, math formula, but
this is not my natural skin color actually. When I was born a lot lighter as a skin type. So, but I burn quite easily. I noticed that even I don't know if I expose myself in the sun for like 15-30 minutes, my skin gets little like red dots and then just kind of charcoals itself into this delicious olive-looking color. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but
yeah, that might be a sensitivity towards sunlight, and actually, quite a fair amount of people have that, and they need to be more careful.
So now that we have talked about skin types and their relation to vitamin D and sunlight exposure, let's talk about. You mentioned latitudes and time zones and. How is that related to vitamin D?
I think we can, like a lot of people live on 40 degrees, and there is a lot of research done actually on 40 degrees and 50 degrees latitude. So 40 degrees latitude is Northern California, New York, Southern Europe, Turkey, across Northern Japan, China, Kazakhstan. That's 40 degrees. So 40 degrees latitude, if you want to produce 2,000 IU vitamin D, you would only need to go outside for 3 times a week during 11 a.m. To 3 p.m. and expose your arms, legs, neck to the sun for only less than half an hour. That's only 3 times a week. So actually, that's very easy, right?
Yeah, but why specifically only 3 times a week? Is it because
no? That's enough. That's already to get those 2,000 IU.
Okay.
So obviously your body regulates it, and if you can go out more, but you should be careful that you don't get sunburn because that has disadvantages in by itself. However, it's very easy to get, only from a few times a week. That's what I'm saying. Now, if you compare that to 50 degrees latitude, it's different. You would have to be exposed to the sun daily. That's one. Several months out of the year, from November to February, you would not be able to produce any vitamin D. And after that, you would need to be exposed to the sun daily for about half an hour. Have your arms, neck, face exposed at least. Now, if you expose your legs, or if you go swimming in your swimming trunks or bathing suit, obviously that time would decrease. And in summer, if you're walking around in your t-shirt, you would only need up to 50 minutes daily.
Okay. So, what about you mentioned southern Canada?
So 50 degrees latitude, you can think of southern Canada, you can think of Central Europe, northern France, Germany, Ukraine, Mongolia. It's around that line. And 50 degrees, that's northern latitude. If we look at the southern latitude, we look at the south of Chile, the south of Argentina. And New Zealand, Tasmania, it's in the 40 range.
Mm-hmm. So Earth is flat, right?
Let's not go into that.
Because latitudes, flatness. But, Earth is round, just for anyone wondering. Or it's flat. Oh.
Who knows?
No, it is round. Anyway, okay, so let's see. But also sometimes vitamin D3 from sunlight can also have a downside. One upside is you get vitamin D, but the downside is sunburn. And that's a very big thing, especially for people from Britain with skin type 1 who can peel off real fast. I have a person in my life who gets burnt really fast, and she is very, very susceptible to sunlight. Therefore, there's a lot of lotion involved. The SPF lotions is involved when going to the beach or anything like that because of the sensitive skin. So can we talk about the whole sensitivity to sunlight and burns and stuff like that?
Okay, so, well, everybody knows, I mean, you always hear it, you need to put sun lotion on you when you go out in the sun. And I mean, in a lot of cases, that's a good idea. You need to, getting sunburn is not ideal. It increases your risk for skin cancer. It's interesting that sun lotion, it's said that it protects against the most dangerous type of skin cancer, and that is melanoma. The research on that is quite weak, but still it's better to prevent getting sunburned in the first place. And so and there are other types of skin cancer that sun lotion can definitely prevent. So the evidence is stronger for less dangerous ones. But, I mean, you would not want to have skin cancer, whether it's melanoma or a different one.
What about whole protection from diet? Is it possible?
Yeah. Okay, so there are a few strategies that I think don't really get enough attention, and I would like to see them get more attention. The most simple one is, if you always go out and about and you always rub yourself in with sun lotion, that your skin cannot acclimatize. So when your skin acclimatizes, it doesn't burn as quickly. So I think it's a point to consider. At least give your skin some exposure naturally and like for shorter periods of time. So you can build up at least some color and resistance, so to speak. But the most important thing that I almost never hear people talking about, and that is what you eat.
Well, that's a big one, I think, because eating specific foods also has specific side effects and certain upsides. For example, I am big on certain antioxidant rich foods, such as blueberries and chia and flax seeds and all that kind of stuff that is not necessarily considered a yummy food. Depends on how you prepare it. But let's go into the whole diet part. Tell me more.
Well, I think it's quite yummy, but
Depends on how it's cooked. I mean, some people say that just chia.
Oh, you should definitely roast your flax seeds if you want them to be more flavorful. It's such a different flavor. It's really great. You need to try.
I just add it to the rice directly.
Yeah.
To the when it gets cooked in the rice
Yeah.
cooker. Yeah, just like that.
Okay. Yeah. So what you're saying now, the antioxidants. That's a very great mention there, cause antioxidants, when you are exposed to sun, and that's kind of strange. Like when people hear, like, when they don't get sunburn, but the sun touches their skin, actually there is already some kind of inflammation taking place. So very, very low grade. So when you have sunburn, that's a higher grade inflammation. So what happens is when the sun touches your skin, actually your antioxidant status is actually important, because white blood cells go to that area. And it sounds strange, right? So why would sunlight do that? Haven't we evolved, we need to produce vitamin D, and why would that happen? So it turns out that the antioxidant status in your skin helps with reducing that inflammation. So especially when you go out in the sun a lot and you're eating a lot of foods rich in antioxidants, that will actually prevent, not necessarily prevent, I mean there's always a limit, but it would slow down the inflammation, and the moment when you get sunburn, okay, that will happen later. So if you have a diet full of antioxidants. And the interesting thing is, we can see that among Greeks and Italians, because we've done studies on those people. It turns out those people actually have less skin cancer, but they're exposed to sunlight quite a lot. And the people with skin cancer, they have lower levels of antioxidants also. And when we have, for example, when we look at people in Australia, they have, because it's very sunny there and it's on a quite low latitude, so they have a lot of sunlight there and it's quite intense. There is an 18 times higher skin cancer rate in comparison to Greeks. Now, but when you take those Greeks and you move them to Australia, it's like some sort of master move them. I mean, when you look at Greeks that migrate to Australia and they take on the same kind of lifestyle and dietary pattern, so you know what happens? Their risk for skin cancer just increases, it spikes up.
Wait, so the Greeks have a sort of a Mediterranean type of diet, right?
Yeah, so naturally a Mediterranean diet. They're very rich in vegetables and fruits and antioxidant-rich foods.
Olive
oil. So
obviously,
loads of different foods. And so it makes total sense that, the antioxidants protect in a way.
I see. I see. So basically in Australia and New Zealand and United States, a lot of those diets are Western diets, which are typically high in processed food, right?
Right.
And now China is also having that kind of same diet. So,
now you sort of gave people a hint on our location.
Right. Oh, wink, wink.
Yeah. So in short, higher antioxidant status is shown that actually it protects against skin cancer.
All right, so now that we have gone through a couple of different aspects of vitamin D3 importance for our immunity in general, and we have covered so many different aspects of the whole topic, such as the skin types and the amount and all of that. Let's quickly summarize all of that so that the people listening are sort of reminded again, because there was a lot of information that went over my head. I mean, I grasped some of it. Just let's do key takeaways for the audience, because I really hope the audience really gets a benefit out of this podcast and episode. George?
Yeah. All right, so to conclude, vitamin D is connected to a lot of different health aspects. it protects you from disease, and it optimizes your immune system. So that's one. Second one, you can find it in food, you can find it in supplements, and you can find it, well, through sunlight. If you take about 2000 IU, that's with minimal sun exposure. So for a lot of people, that would be in winter times at least. If you like to go out and you're exposed to the sun a lot, it's a different story, especially in the spring and summer months. If you're on 50 degrees latitude, that's okay. If you're on 40 degrees latitude, that's also fine. But if you are lower than on 20 degrees here, we can also produce vitamin C, I wanted to say. You can produce vitamin C also in winter times. So for us, it's much easier.
Right.
Now, I say 2000 IU with minimal sun exposure. If you eat food with vitamin D, you need a less sun exposure. So you can take that into account. And if you have a darker skin type, you need up to twice, the darkest skin types need up to twice more sun exposure than people with skin type 2, so such as me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I live on 50 degrees latitude, I need sun exposure daily throughout the year, and I don't count winter now, up to half an hour. If you live on 40 degrees latitude, you need only a couple of times a week, 3 times a week or so. Up to half an hour is also okay.
So for people who are not clear on their specific amount, given maybe some of the listeners are from different parts of the world, can they look up how much vitamin D they need daily on the internet, or should they go to a physician or a dietitian or doctor to find out the needed amounts?
Yeah, so like I said, the optimum recommended amount of vitamin D, there are more and more nutritionists, dietitians, doctors that actually don't agree with the current recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So like me, so it's if you go to a physician, he or she may not be aware of the recommended amounts, and not everybody knows like what sun exposure you need. There is no magic pill here. If you get some from vitamin D, just track your diet through, for example, chronometer.com. It's an excellent tool to track your nutrition. You can at least see what you get through your diet. Now, if that is 0 and you don't like to go out in the sun, or you always use sun lotion, taking a vitamin D supplement is the easiest way, and I would recommend it. Just you do need to keep your vitamin D levels at least up to a healthy level.
But to measure the actual amount inside a person's body, they would probably have to go do like a specialized test, right?
Yeah, you can have it measured. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and but then I would recommend people to pay attention to if they measure nanograms per milliliter. I think I said deciliter. It's per milliliter. If they measure nanograms, have it above 30. And if they measure nanomoles, depending on where you live, have it above 75. That would be
Right.
The minimum.
And I've been kind of lacking in vitamin D, Maybe that's a reason for certain things that happen in my life. Anyway, so to sum up, vitamin D3 is important, right?
Yes, extremely important.
Extremely important. And for any of the listeners who would like to purchase the vitamin D3 supplement that George advised, we will have a link for you. It may be affiliated, it may not be. And we will put a disclaimer there next to the link, so please check it out if you're interested. And we are going to see you in the next episode. But before we say goodbye, we would like to mention that we are on different podcast platforms, and you can follow us. It would be very nice if you could follow us, and we will have a lot more interesting episodes in the future. So make sure you check out major podcast platforms, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we will post the full episodes and put it out in different clip forms, so you can see each particular individual piece of information broken down, and You can watch it, and we will see you next time. So thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.